Welcome to Football Game Plan's FCS Kickoff, presented by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Mike McCarthy is producer, and we're coming off an excellent week of action in the FCS, and week 2 is shaping up to be just as good. Here's what we have on tap for this week's episode. Week 1 was filled with some upsets, and we'll take a look at who should be on upset alert this week. Some of the FCS premier players stood out last weekend, and we'll see which NFL draft prospects have a chance to do the same in week 2. And as always, we'll take you coast to coast previewing some of the intriguing matchups this week in the football championship subdivision. But first, let's take a look at some of the key storylines heading into week 2 as we get things kicked off in our 4-minute offense. There were 4 upsets last week by FCS programs as Tennessee State, James Madison, Howard, and Liberty all notched victories over their FBS counterparts. Both Tennessee State and James Madison were dominant in their games, and both Rhode Island and Youngstown State took their FBS opponents into overtime before losing. The Rams were the most impressive as it took 3 overtimes and a missed chip shot field goal by a freshman kicker for the Chippewas to come away with the victory. And as we always say and will continue to say on this show, the FCS talent is criminally underrated, and a lot of programs end up finding that out on game day when they end up in a close call or on the losing end of the scoreboard. One particular FCS over FBS game garnered a lot of attention this week as the Howard Bison of the MEAC went out to Las Vegas as 45-point underdogs and knocked off the UNLV Rebels. Now, the Rebels had no answer for quarterback Kalen Newton and the Bison's go-go offensive attack. The true freshman signal caller ran for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns to help first-year head coach Mike London grab Howard's first victory over an FBS opponent in program history. We'll see if they can make it 2 as the Bison travel to Ohio to take on Kent State. Another reason for the growing number of fans in the football championship subdivision is because these programs are being seen more and more on national TV or on national streaming services. This week alone, there will be 37 games involving the FCS on national television and web streaming services, not counting what's being shown perhaps in their local markets. And being more available to people across the globe has definitely had a positive impact on recruiting as more kids are making informed decisions on where they want to go and play college football than ever before. Weather could be a factor yet again in the FCS. As we saw last week, Prairie View and Sam Houston State had to get postponed because of Hurricane Harvey, and this week the Florida International Alcorn State game could be in jeopardy as well because of Hurricane Irma, which looks to be making a beeline to the Miami area. Again, this is the season for these types of storms to start coming about, and we'll definitely monitor this situation closely as we move throughout the week.
I think the FCS gives a student athlete a chance to really develop in the classroom and on the field. And I don't think there's anything that gets in the way of the development of the student athlete. You know, whereas in sometimes other conferences, other levels of play, I think there's some things that could sway a student athlete in a wrong direction here or there. But I think at the FCS level, I think it's all about the student athlete. I think it's all about his development in the classroom and also on the playing field. And it really it keeps your values and your goals right in front of you. And I think there's less things that are going to take you away from those things.
Howard University is coming off a record upset against UNLV, and now they have to travel to Kent State to take on the Golden Flashes. And you know that game will be on our list here, but let's take a look at a few others that should be on upset alert this weekend. The Alcorn State Florida International game is one that we thought would be affected by Hurricane Irma, and it was just announced that this game will be moved from Miami to Birmingham, Alabama on Friday night instead. Now, on the field, the Panthers have problems. The biggest concern will be in the trenches and if they can consistently make stops against the running game. This is a game where the Braves match up actually very well versus an FBS foe. Look for Alcorn to control the line of scrimmage and slowly take the air out of the ball en route to a victory over FIU. Missouri State's offense put on a show last week against the Missouri Tigers of the SEC, and that offensive outburst and their potential to be explosive moving forward is what makes this game against North Dakota very interesting. However, if you also notice in that ball game against Missouri, the Bears gave up a boatload of points and couldn't really stop the run, and that's music to the ears of the Fighting Hawks, who held their own very early against the Utah Utes. I think they'll avoid the upset here and take some of the air out of the balloon of the Bears' confidence. This is another game that has potential to be a lot closer than people think, partly because of the fact that both teams are built the same way. I was impressed with Villanova's passing game last week versus Lehigh as it really balanced out their offensive attack. The biggest concern is defensively, as they couldn't generate a pass rush. Temple's offense is still trying to find its way as they break in a new quarterback, but the biggest matchup I think in this game will be on the perimeter. The Owls have two outstanding wide receivers in Ventrell Bryant and Keith Kirkwood. They'll be going up against one of the best secondaries in the FCS. Now, it'll be a good one and a close one, but I like the Owls. The Bison are rumbling into Kent, Ohio to take on the Golden Flashes, and this game will come down to a simple question. Can Kent State stop the run? That's where they struggled last week, and that's where the Bison hang their hats. Obviously, the goal for Kent State defensive coordinator Ben Needham is to force true freshman quarterback Kalen Newton to beat them throwing the football. Howard University head coach Mike London has to get his team to forget about last week and treat this game as the season opener. A lot of eyes will be on this matchup this weekend. If you remember, last year the Golden Flashes lost to North Carolina A&T in overtime, and they can't lose this game, but I don't think they'll have a choice. I like the Bison. Now it's time to take a look at an offensive and defensive NFL draft prospect and their matchup that you want to keep an eye on this upcoming week. Jeremiah Briscoe of Sam Houston State got off to a great start last week. The 6'3", 225-pound signal caller has all of the traits that you want to see from a quarterback prospect, especially coming from the FCS. In this game versus Prairie View A&M, I will be looking to see how he handles the pressure situations. Now, they may be few and far in between, but how he handles third downs, backed up situations, and blitz pressure coming from that Panthers defense is what I will be watching for in this contest. Andrew Ankra of James Madison is your quintessential edge rusher who can play with his hand off the ground or in the dirt. Ankra filled up the stat sheet last week against ECU, and in his ball game against East Tennessee State, you want to see if he can dominate or have a dominant performance in a game where he should dominate against the Bucs. It's that time of the show where we go coast to coast around the FCS landscape to preview some games, and we'll start out west where we have a big one between North Dakota State and Eastern Washington. I was a little disappointed in the Eagles last week as they laid an egg against Texas Tech. I expected their offense to have slight struggles considering all of the talent that they lost this offseason, but defensively, they didn't have an answer for the Red Raiders. The Bison are coming into this ball game in midseason form, especially up front on both sides of the ball, and I don't expect them to feel sorry for Eastern Washington. I like the Bison to win this one. Huge early season matchup in the Northeast Conference between Wagner and St. Francis, and this game will ultimately come down to perimeter defense and which team can find ways to get off the field on third downs. Now, I was impressed with the ground game of the Red Flash last week, and that bodes well for them moving forward. Wagner did what they were supposed to do against St. Anselm at home, and this will be a huge test for their defense. This will be a very close game, but I like the Red Flash a bit more defensively right now, and they'll come away with the victory. Richmond-Colgate is an interesting matchup, and I'm always intrigued by the Raiders because they play a unique brand of football that's a tough matchup for any opponent. Colgate challenges you on both sides of the line of scrimmage and does a great job in keeping big plays to a minimum. Richmond played a sound game last week against Sam Houston in an explosive offense, but they were the exact opposite of Colgate defensively in the sense that they kept giving up the big play, which led to their demise ultimately in that ball game. Will the Spiders defense be able to stop the run consistently? Well, we will see, but I think their offense will be too much for the Raiders to handle. I like Richmond. Another huge week one matchup, this time in the SoCon as Wofford and Mercer meet up. Both are coming off week one victories. Wofford and their option attack is always a tough matchup for anyone. Defensively is where I have some questions. Mercer's momentum has been building over the last two seasons, and now this experienced group has enough pieces on both sides of the ball to make some noise in the FCS. I think it starts in this game versus Wofford. I'm taking the Bears. So that's it for this episode of the FCS Kickoff. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. And if you miss any one of our episodes or want to check them out again, visit our website at footballgameplan.com/FCS Kickoff. And don't forget to check out and subscribe on iTunes to the Football Game Plan FCS Opening Drive podcast, and be on the lookout for our FCS Whip Around coming this week.